Afternoon. This is the interview of Father Ben Urmston. It's taking place on March 4th, 2011 at the Hamilton County Public Library in downtown Cincinnati. I'm John Gabriel. Also present is Brian Powers, Bob Wobbelding, and Daniel Batch. Thank you, Father. Nice to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
This is your hour to talk about your experiences during the war. Let's start with what happened before the war. Tell us about where you grew up and
I grew up in North College Hill, Ohio. My mother says that when they were married, it was just our farm and the farm across the street. But now, of course, it's all built up. It's no longer farmland.
What College Hill were you growing
We
up?
were right next to Mount Healthy.
I see.
And my grandfather, who was a 32nd degree Mason and owned a lot of property in Mount Healthy, persuaded the powers that be that we should be in Mount Healthy School District, even though we actually were in North College Hill across the boundary line. So I went to Mount Healthy High School.
I see. Well, do you have any recollections of what you were doing when the war broke out?
I was caddying. There was a golf course right near our property, the Homestead Golf Course, and I was caddying, and the man I was caddying for said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 16. He said, "Well, you don't have any chance of getting in the war because by the time you're 21, the war will be over."
Well, that didn't happen exactly that way.
Well, the war was over by the time I was 21, but they started taking soldiers at 18.
Were you enlisted or were you drafted?
Well, there was something called the Army Specialized Training Program. You took an examination, and if you ranked high enough, you could enlist in this program. And this program took you to college. You went to college while you were in the Army, and then you went to officers' school, and so on. So I had visions of becoming an officer, staying in for 20 years, and then retiring at 38, doing what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
So evidently, did you pass that exam?
Sure.
Okay. Where did that lead you? Once you got the results of that exam back then, how did you matriculate?
Well, I don't remember where you enlisted, but I know that I did. I enlisted in the program so that I was, I think, in the reserves, and then they called me up 3 weeks after I was 18.
I see.
In November of 43.
Where'd they send you?
Well, I went to Fort Thomas here in Kentucky, and then I went to Fort Benning in Georgia.
Was that for basic training?
For basic training, yes.
How was that?
It was good. I was with college students from all over the country, and it was quite a good experience. We had college students from different religions and backgrounds. We didn't have any blacks. We were segregated from blacks. But otherwise, I remember a young Jewish student who was very kind and friendly, and I hadn't had much experience with Jewish students until I got into the Army.
Huh. Did the drill sergeants and everyone who was training you treat you the same way as they treated the raw enlisted recruits?
Well, I'm sure, yeah.
Yes.
Even worse.
Even worse.
They wanted to teach us college kids, what discipline was like.
I see. Oh, boy.
No favors.
Well, you'll have that. Probably made a tough soldier out of you.
Could be.
How much time did you spend at Fort Benning?
Well, 3 months was the regular training, and then we stayed a little while longer because even though we were supposed to go to college, they changed their mind and sent us to the infantry. And they sent us to the 86th Infantry Division. They had sent all the privates out, so the crew that was left were the officers and the non-commissioned officers. So there wasn't much chance of advancement there.
I see. When you got your way through that additional period of time in training, did you come out with a rank, an officer's rank?
No, I stayed a private first class.
Private first class, I see. Where'd they send you after that?
After Louisiana, we went to California.
Oh, you went to Louisiana?
After California, we went to Boston. After Boston, we went to Le Havre in France.
In all these stops in Louisiana and California and Boston, were you trained to do other things?
We were trained in what they called amphibious training. We were trained to invade Japan.
Oh, I see. Huh. In both California and Louisiana, you worked on...
Well, in Louisiana, we just did training. We did maneuvers in the swamps of Louisiana.
Oh, boy.
In the summertime. It was not pleasant.
Oh.
Then we went to San Luis Obispo, which was like going to heaven.
Sure. Did you ride in the Higgins boats and things like that?
We got on big boats and went over the side and invaded California, came up on the shore, and
Wow.
had maneuvers.
Sure. That's not far from Camp Pendleton today, I think.
I don't know.
I think they're still doing, I think the Marines are still doing that over that same area.
Okay,
So then they sent you to Le Havre, France.
right. And then to combat on the Rhine River.
I noticed here that you got into France the beginning of March 1945, March 3rd, and just about 3 weeks later or so, you were right up on the front lines.
Right. Well, they used to tell us, you are the front lines.
You are the front lines, my goodness. Tell me about that trip as they started to move you on up to the front lines. Did you know that was your destination on the drive there, the walk there?
We usually didn't know anything. We just followed orders.
Were you just an infantryman at this point?
Right. I was the, what did we call them? Like a scout. I was liaison. I went to intelligence school. I was liaison between the officer of the platoon and the platoon leaders. So I was into communication.
Did you carry a radio?
Yeah, a walkie-talkie.
I see. What kind of weapon did you carry?
We had rifles.
Any sidearms or anything like that to go with it?
No.
Just a standard M1?
Right.
I'll be darned. All right, so you arrived on the front on March 29th, 1945. Where was that?
It was on the Rhine River. It was near Cologne. You could see the cathedral on the other side of the river.
Is this the town of Weiden?
All I know is that it was close to Cologne.
Okay, that's what it says here too. Yep, close to vicinity of Cologne. Yep. Anything, did you see any of the enemy, any Germans that first day out there?
No, it was wide enough. I would say it was about as wide as the Ohio River. And it was not, they were not going to show themselves easily.
I noticed in something you wrote, in prepared before we came here, that you crossed a river
Right,
under fire in a rubber boat.
right.
Was that close to the time we're talking about right now?
Well, at first as I was trying to remember, I thought it was, but it may have been later on.
It says
But I remember that very distinctly. It was not what shall I say, not the most pleasant experience that I've had.
were these motorized or were you rowing?
Well, engineers did the rowing. We just got in the boat and they took us across and then they came back for more.
Was it during the daytime or at night?
It was daytime.
What kind of rounds were you receiving while you made this crossing?
I don't remember.
I just wonder if they were lobbing mortars at you? Or...
No, I think it was more rifle fire.
Son of a gun. Well, then when you got across there,
Yeah, somehow we did.
you had to immediately get into fighting positions, I suppose, once you got over there.
Right.
My goodness. What are some of the memories you have of being under fire?
Not too many. I remember one where I was right next to the platoon officer, the platoon leader, and we were going across a field and we were under fire, and he was not getting up. And I said, "It's time. We better keep moving because we're exposed here." So he decided that, yeah, it was time.
Must have been a frightening time.
Right.
Where was this?
I don't remember. Somewhere in Germany.
Somewhere in Germany. Were you finding, as you went across Germany, you were meeting heavy resistance or
Relatively light.
relatively light?
Yeah. Enough that we had casualties, but we did not have heavy casualties.
The division you were in had an armored component to it. Were your tanks fighting German tanks, or
I don't know.
you didn't see a lot of armor with you?
I didn't know.
I see. Well, what your unit did really, he accomplished very well, was capturing enemy prisoners. Were you involved in any of that?
Yes, I can remember prisoners surrendering to me.
How did they come about?
They would just appear and would, have their hands up, and I would direct them to behind the lines and so on.
Would this be in a town that you were entering, or they just come out of the woods and say,
My remembrance, my personal experience, they came out of the woods.
Son of a gun. How many of them?
Just two. One was an older man and one was just like a boy.
Were they in uniform and everything?
Oh, sure.
I'll be done. Did you pat them down and?
No, I just directed them to. They didn't seem like they were hostile.
Sure.
They wanted to give up.
In some of the other interviews I've conducted with the infantry men who fought in Europe, there were a number of guys who said in our units, a lot of guys could speak German. Their households, back in the States, in German heritage. Did you have that luxury too in your unit?
No, I learned some German words, especially in my dealings with civilians after the war.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know German.
I see. Was that the only time you encountered prisoners, just those two folks?
It's the only time when I say I personally, they surrendered to me. But we took prisoners all the time.
Well, did you also lose men to being captured to the Germans?
I don't remember that anybody in our outfit was captured by the enemy.
Oh.
They were wounded or killed, but not captured.
When they were wounded or killed, was it normally rifle fire
Or mortar fire.
mortar fire?
Yeah.
You found yourself...
And sometimes the Germans at the end of the war would use anti-aircraft guns and point them, use them as artillery. And it would often it would explode, and it was not pleasant.
No, I'm sure. Did you find that the noise level in combat was something you remember? Or was it?
I don't remember, but I know I'm hard of hearing.
Some of the veterans talk about the surprise they got at the chaos and the loud noises they experienced during combat. Well, what's it like going through some of the German villages and towns with civilians present or hostile?
They were frightened. I remember once we went across a field and into a backyard, and the sergeant in our outfit had a little axe, and he started knocking on the door, or pounding on the door, and the man opened the door. Said, "I don't want you to damage the door." But no, I would say they were, I never met any hostile civilian. And then we stayed with civilians after the truce. We stayed with civilians. I believe the town was Freudenheim, was near Mannheim. And then he happened to have been born in Ohio. And
The civilian in Germany?
yeah.
Son of a gun.
And he had relatives, he had sisters in the United States, and after the war, we became friends, and after the war, I corresponded with them. I wrote in English, and they wrote in German, and we each got translators. But they had sisters in New York, and my brother and mother visited them. And also after the war, it was difficult for civilians, and I remember my mother sent them food and things of that nature.
Were the other soldiers in your unit civil toward the German civilians?
Yes, I never saw any abuse.
Good, good. What did you do at nighttime? Were you sleeping in the villages or out in the open fields?
Well, now being 85 and a half, and many things, many irons in the fire, so to speak, and I'm totally now opposed to war and the idea of war. I think war is obsolete, that sometimes I don't sleep well at nighttime without a little help. And I can remember when I was in the Army, I could sleep in an open field. It could be raining, and usually I'd try for a little cover.
Hi, my name is Brian Powers. I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project, which is coordinated by the Library of Congress and the Public Library of Cincinnati. Today is March 8th, 2011, and today we're doing a follow-up interview with Father Benjamin Urmston, who was here the other day, and I'm glad that he could make it back despite our technical difficulties we had. We want to start back where we had you the other day. Thank you for coming today, Father.
My pleasure.
Now, last time you were here, you were in Europe. You were sleeping in some fields, and you had made friends with a guy that was born in Ohio but was living in Germany.
That was after the war.
Right, but you had met him during the war, right?
No. It was only after the truce was signed.
Okay. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your movements. Like where were you starting on your, first of all, where were you starting out from, and then where did you end up? Like what direction were you traveling? What was your orders? That kind of.
You're talking about Germany?
Yeah. when you were
In
here?
total, I figured that I had traveled about 50,000 miles in the Army, and none of it by plane. It was all by either walking or automobile or train or truck.
Now,
But in Germany, we went into combat on the Rhine River. Then we went to what was called the Ruhr Pocket. And then we went south with Patton's army and we ended in Austria when the war was over.
so that was only over just a few months' time.
Yes.
Right? So how often were you staying in one place? How fast were you guys moving?
We moved somewhere else every day and often many times during the day.
Did you have a sense where you were going? Was there orders, or did you just find out each day you were going somewhere else?
We, an individual unit did not know. The general, of course, knew, and the officers knew, but where we were in a platoon, we were the front lines. We went where we were directed to go, and we just noticed that it was an open field, or it was a civilian residence, or wherever.
And when you met up with Patton's Army, what were you doing with Patton's Army? What were
Well, we were going south, and if we met resistance, often the lead units would continue on, and the rear units would mop up, so to speak. So we took many, many prisoners, but we also encountered some resistance. One thing that the Germans were doing, they took their anti-aircraft guns and they used it as artillery, which was rather scary because sometimes the bombs would go off in the air, so to speak.
And this is kind of like I was going to ask, like, did you feel there was a sense that the war was ending?
Oh, yes. It was, we were on the move. The fact that we didn't meet strong resistance, we felt it was the beginning of the end.
Did you get a feeling that maybe you were going to go to Berlin? You're going to be part of that mission?
We didn't know, but we didn't. We went south.
And so you were there when the war ended. You were actually in.
I was in Austria, right over the border. Actually, it was a resort town, and there was a lake there and boats, and we had a good time in
It's
Austria.
a good place to be.
Yeah, and I remember we went to Mass there also at the local church.
Well, how did you find out the war ended? How did you receive that news? Do you remember that?
We were certainly relieved. It's not easy to be shot at, and actually it's not easy to shoot at other people. Fortunately, as I said, most of the Germans were surrendering when we got to them.
And what was the general feeling of people? I guess you were in Germany, you were in Austria, but what was the sense of the citizens there with the war over?
Well, the people that we stayed with were naturally afraid when they heard we were coming, and they moved their daughter to the grandmother's house. But after a while, soon they got to know us, and we became friends.
So you were staying at somebody's house?
Right.
Yeah. How many soldiers were there? Did they have?
I would say there were about 6 of us staying in the house. And we got to know them very well, and I wrote to them afterwards, and my mother and brother visited their relatives in New York City. And he was an ordinary civilian, but he had a very religious orientation, and he was very insightful too.
So how long did you stay in Europe after the war? How long were you stationed there?
Not long, I would say 3 weeks to a month.
What kind of things were you doing? Were you guarding, or what were you?
In Germany after the war, we were just biding our time until the next assignment came.
And after you left Germany, I know you were going to the Asian. Did you know that when you were in Europe that that's where you were going next?
Well, actually, originally, maybe we ought to stop and I could get some water.
Absolutely. What were you doing in Oklahoma?
Training, waiting for whatever was to follow. And we were scheduled to go to Japan.
And how did you arrive? How did they send you out to the Pacific?
Well, by boat, I traveled about 50,000 miles, and none of it was by plane. By foot or truck or train, but not by plane.
So, but by the time you got over there, the war was just about over, right?
Yeah, they made the truce when we were on the Pacific Ocean. We were headed there.
Because they heard you were coming?
I like to kid and think that, but they had offered to surrender the year before. So the dropping of the atomic bomb, all of that was completely unnecessary.
But you did spend time in Asia. You were in the Philippines?
From August of 45 to May of 46, I was in the Philippines. We needed to guard the equipment, and there were Japanese prisoners there. There was a transition that had to happen.
And where were you in the Philippines? Where were you stationed?
In Batangas and in Manila. And we went down to the base bottom of Luzon toward the end. It was a small missionary town.
Where were the prisoner of wars, the Japanese prisoner of wars, where were they kept at? In like a concentration camp, or where were they at?
They were in prisons. I don't know that we wanted to call it a concentration camp.
Well, right, that's right. I was wondering if they were used, if there were Philippine jails that were used, or were they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they also were required to do work, say like build sidewalks or whatever.
So, what was the feeling you had? You had a little bit of time in Europe when the war ended, and then you had some considerable time in Asia. What would you do? How did you feel the difference was with people, the natives, how they felt post-war? I mean, was there anything you can compare between the two experiences?
Well, there was more poverty in the Philippines, and I remember the children when we went to eat. As we were getting ready to discard the remains of our food, the children were there and they wanted the scraps, so to speak, the leftovers that we had. And I didn't experience that as much in Germany.
Now, it was in the Philippines that you, I guess you made your decision at that point.
To become a Jesuit priest.
Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision?
A fellow student from Xavier, I had been an undergraduate student at Xavier before I entered the Army, and he was thinking of becoming a Jesuit, and he confided that to me, and that got me thinking. And there was much time in my experience in the Army for reflection, for prayer. And I was away from home. I was with very intelligent men from all over the country and all different religions. So I had much time for prayer and reflection. So in a sense, it was almost like a retreat. Not completely, but to a great extent, I had much time for prayer and reflection. And especially when I was in the Philippines after the wars were over. And I had gone over both oceans, so I had a sense of we're one world, and I wanted to make this a peaceful and fair world.
So when you got out of the service sometime in '46,
Yes.
and I think, was it the spring of '46?
No, it was more like May of '46, maybe toward the end of May. I don't remember the exact date.
And then pretty much by that decision, you knew you wanted to go with the priesthood?
Right.
And so what did you do next after that?
Well, I enjoyed myself during the summer, and then I became a Jesuit in September.
And being a Jesuit priest, that takes a lot of training. There's a lot of years of doing that kind of thing. Which was harder, would you say? Was it being in the Army training? Or being
Well, there were similarities, but I would say it was harder in the Army.
Yeah. So how did the war affect your views on, well, I guess what you think about the world? I mean, how did the war, how did that inform your worldview, I guess? Or
Well, I think I came away from the war with the idea there had to be a better way than what we were doing. The Army had community, it was efficient, it was organized, and I think it can still be a good help, say if there are riots or if there's a natural disaster like Katrina. But for human persons to fight and kill other human persons, for nations to fight over scarce resources, it doesn't make any sense to me, especially when there is an alternative. It's called the Democratic World Federation, and many people have advocated that for many, many years. St. Thomas Aquinas did, Dante, great philosophers like Immanuel Kant, and in our own day, many presidents and many public figures, and certainly many popes have said, no one ever wins a war. It's always a defeat for our reason and for our humanity. So I think war is very expensive, obviously, and that hurts our economy. It's very dangerous. It's destructive of the environment, and it's filled with secrecy and deceit. The expression that's classified is often abused, maybe more often than not. And we have to, I think, to glorify war today, whatever the situation was before the Second World War, to glorify war today is a huge mistake.
But after you became a Jesuit priest, I know you've done a lot of different initiatives, different programs. Can you talk about some of the stuff that you've started, like at the Xavier University?
Well, we started peace studies at Xavier. So one approach is to study the past and to study a certain small part of the past so that you know more and more about less and less. And I'm not saying we shouldn't study the past, but we should also, I think, look ahead to the future and envision a world where we have peace, basic peace, an inclusive global economy which is fair to everyone and respects the economic rights of everyone, and a sustainable earth. If we don't have a sustainable earth, or if we have a nuclear war, that's the end.
That's it.
See? I'm amazed how even Congress sometimes talks about nuclear wars as though a nuclear weapon is just a bigger conventional weapon. It isn't. And we have to realize that.
And one of the things you also have is a radio show, right?
Yes, I had a weekly radio show for 28 years called Faith and Justice. So I took religious people who had faith and who were interested in social justice, not just social service, but social justice. Social service meets immediate needs, like feeding the poor, but social justice works on making this a fair economy, giving people a fair wage, collective bargaining, having a progressive taxation, all of those things would, and actually having more cooperatives, worker-owned cooperatives would make this, I think, a fair economy, so that the chasm between the very wealthy and the very poor would not be there. And I think that's happening more and more, and it's disaster. It's a formula for disaster, besides being unfair and really cruel.
Can you talk about some of the things you've been doing recently? I know you've met with some politicians and other people. I mean, is that stuff you still continue to do? Can you talk a little bit about the stuff you're doing right now?
Well, I work with the Christian Life Community, and like the Society of Jesus, Christian Life Community combines faith and justice. And I think we minimize the value of faith and religion in working for peace and justice. I think it's a great advantage. And often it's people of faith who persevere in the field of justice, because there are obviously a lot of setbacks, and it can be overwhelming, the problems of the world. So your faith, I think, your religion can be a big help. I know the Muslims have invited the Catholics and Christians to work with them for peace. If you take the Muslims and the Christians together, they are the majority of the people of the world. And if those two faiths work together, we could have peace. And we should have peace. And we will have peace.
Once we get out of our two wars we've been in for a while?
Right.
Are you involved with any of that kind of, with the, any kind of organizations about the current wars that we're in?
I work with Citizens for Global Solutions, and we have formed a Greater Cincinnati chapter of Citizens for Global Solutions. So we support the United Nations. We think it's a step toward a democratic world federation. We support a global, inclusive world economy, We can't allow, I don't think, corporations to rule our elections and rule our economy. We, the people, need to take charge of our economy and end the war system. It really doesn't make sense. As I said, it's very undemocratic, filled with secrecy and deceit, where decisions are made by just a few people. And actually, the economy is similar. Decisions are made by large corporations rather than by we, the people. And often we neglect the earth. And the earth is not free. We have to pay if we're going to destroy our environment. And it affects also all living beings and all living plants.
I was wondering, like, do you encounter many military people in your the things that you do, your activities, and
Well,
do you find there's much difference than the military now than when it was when you were in the military? Is the attitude different, the same? Any thoughts on that?
I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and I'm still in contact with some of the men from our outfit are still alive. Many of them are now deceased. And I would say there's a difference of opinion among veterans. The natural thing is to justify what you have done and think that you've made a contribution, and in a sense we did. And good things did happen after the Second World War. But I think after the First World War and after the Second World War, we should have formed a democratic world federation. We should get more into sharing. The major resources of the world need to be owned in common. Father Ea Correa from El Salvador was very much into that. And there are many people today talking about reclaiming the commons. That is to say, some common resources, say like oil, are things that should be owned in common by we the people, and not a few private individuals who have more money than all of Central and South America.
You just got to talk to them. You got to convince them. Give some of that.
Yes, but I think we have to, we the people have to reflect and take charge. The only reason why a few are ruling us is because we the people don't reflect and don't assert our rights as people, as persons.
Have you ever had a chance to go back to Germany or go back to the Philippines?
I haven't. I've gone back to, I went to the worker-owned cooperatives in Mondragon. I've gone to the Soviet Union. I've gone to El Salvador, Nicaragua, Cuba. I've gone back to the Philippines and Japan and China, but I've never gone back to Germany.
It's on the list though, right?
Right, right.
Well, I just really have one last question. If you have any final thoughts after that, that'd be great. Can you talk about is it the Dorothy
Day House.
Dorothy Day House. Can you talk about the Dorothy Day House? It's at Xavier University?
Well, as I mentioned, we started peace studies at Xavier, which is an interdisciplinary discipline that looks at war, peace, and the environment. But we also had extracurricular, co-curricular activities, namely a place that we called the Dorothy Day House in honor of Dorothy Day, who was an outstanding Catholic laywoman who founded the Catholic worker movement. So we did social service, but we also did social justice. In other words, we demonstrated against war, against poverty, and against destruction of our environment, and against homelessness. Every year we had a shanty town. We put up makeshift shelters on the mall, and the students actually slept in them, and often fasted during that period.
So that's a lot of the students, that's something that they can get a degree in and move on. I mean, do you have a lot of students who are doing the same kind of work that you're doing now?
I wouldn't, a lot, it's a minority, but I think more and more realize that we have to make a change in our attitudes, in our policies, in our structures. And Pope Benedict XVI has stressed that we have to change the structures if we're going to try to love our neighbor.
Well, I wish you luck. Do you have any final
Well,
thoughts?
I was hoping you would say I want to join you.
Well, what, I got to do the Veterans History Project. It takes up a lot of time.
Well, I think all things work together unto good, and we all have to spend some time taking a look at the structures and trying to envision a better world, and then figuring steps toward that better world.
I hope, because if it doesn't, I don't know what we're going to do, because we're not going in a good direction right now. But hopefully, maybe before it's too
We'll
late.
do what we can for as long as we can.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming by. And,
You're very welcome.
And thanks for being part of the project.
Thank you.